Good afternoon. My name is Kimberly Williams, and I work in the Community Engagement Division at the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, and I will be your moderator today. For full accessibility today, it is critical that speakers first identify themselves by name before proceeding to speak and mute their microphones after they are done speaking. We have ASL interpreters on screen, and live captioning is available by turning on subtitles using the CC icon on the lower part of the screen. We will have a question and answer portion during today's session, and attendees can use the Q&A function on the lower part of the screen to type in questions for our panelists at any time. With that being said, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you to our 2024 MI, spelled M-I, Response to Hate virtual campaign forums. This series will feature a new installation of hate and bias awareness programs each month from now through September, when the campaign ends with our annual My Response to Hate conference. Right now, let's take a look at the PSA our team developed to capture the spirit of the My Response to Hate campaign.
Did you know that race is the #1 motivating factor for hate crimes in the United States?
Did you know that hate crimes against Asian Americans have increased by over 73% since 2019?
Did you know that there are state and federal laws that protect you against hate crimes and bias incidents?
The Michigan Department of Civil Rights and the Michigan Alliance Against Hate Crimes have launched the My Response to Hate campaign to inform Michiganders of hate crimes and bias incidents occurring in Michigan.
You can take action in your own way by showing love, not hate.
If you see something, say something.
Support victims. Report the incident.
Make a commitment.
My response to hate.
My response to hate.
My response to hate.
My response to hate is love.
Visit michigan.gov/MDCR for more information on hate crimes, bias incidents, and available resources.
This is Kimberly speaking. It is our hope that these forums provide you with information pertaining to hate and bias prevention that you can implement and use in your daily lives, at your places of work, in your schools, and in your communities. Once again, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you to the April Forum of My Response to Hate. If you missed any of our previous forums, which started in January of 2022, the series is available for viewing at your convenience on the Michigan Department of Civil Rights YouTube and Facebook platforms. You can learn more at michigan.gov/MDCR. Our first presenter, John Cauchi, is an inclusive consultant and trainer at Disability Advocates of Kent County. With a decade of experience in disability services and a personal journey that ignites unwavering advocacy after losing most of his sight at age 12, John brings passion, knowledge, and dedication to all his work. Beyond his professional role, John is a devoted father, youth coach for the Michigan Blind Athletic Association, and an active member of various boards. He also embraces humor as an amateur stand-up comedian, showcasing his unique ability to connect with others. John's overarching goal is to create a true sense of belonging for all individuals. Through his expertise and personal experiences, he strives to make a positive impact in the lives of those he encounters. Please welcome John Cauchi.
John Cauchi, hello. Are my slides up? Okay, here we go. So again, my name is John Cauchi. I'm a youth, sorry, that was my old role. I am an inclusion consultant and trainer over at Disability Advocates of Kent County, where I offer trainings on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility with a disability perspective. Next slide, please. Oftentimes, I like to start off my discussions with a simple question of what is disability? And I think these two images I have screened are very powerful when it comes to that. The first image, the image on my left that I'm looking at, is the traditional universal symbol of accessibility. Many will commonly refer to it as the handicap sign. This sign is what we've seen to indicate accessibility all throughout our country. But to the right of our screen, you will see the new universal symbol of accessibility that the state of Michigan legislature has voted in to replace all existing signs when they do need replacing. I do think this is a very powerful thing as we're moving forward, looking at inclusion and a sense of belonging for individuals with disabilities, as there truly is no symbol that can really encompass what disability is. But at least with this change in symbol, it shows more power, more independence, and a more active lifestyle that a lot of individuals with disabilities do lead. Next slide, please. Now, like I said, when I was young, I acquired a disability, being legal blindness. And I remember opening up a dictionary and trying to figure out what is this disability word everybody keeps mentioning. And I saw written down there, the inability to do things the normal way. That left me very uncomfortable till I found the ADA definition, which is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more
Kimberly,
major...
this is Tyra. I'm sorry to interrupt you. The interpreter is not visible to the attendees.
Oh, yep. If you guys want to take a second to...
Yes, let's pause one moment.
Yep.
And the host, which I believe is Charles, you should be in a gallery view. This is Kim speaking, as well as we want to hide any non-video participants.
Are you able to see them now?
This is Kimberly speaking. We are all set. John, you have the floor.
Okay. My apologies for anything that may have been missed. But like I mentioned, when I first acquired a disability and saw the definition of the inability to do things the normal way, that left me feeling very uncomfortable. Because in my opinion, normal is just a setting on the video game. It does not describe human beings. The Americans with Disabilities Act, however, did have a definition that made me feel a lot more comfortable. And that was a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And when you really think of what is a major life activity is very broad. It really comes down to anything our body does, whether it be sensory, physical movements, functions of our organs, thought processes, emotion regulation. All these different things are major life activities. So when you look at what is a disability, it truly is a very broad category. Next. Next slide, please. Thank you. When we look at the numbers, when we're talking about individuals with disabilities, we're talking about over 61 million US adults. That comes out to more than 1 billion individuals globally, coming out to about 1 in 4 individuals, or for those who prefer percentages, it's about 27% of our population. When we're talking about minority groups, individuals with disabilities are a fairly large minority group. And we are a minority group that is continuing to grow. Individuals with disabilities are becoming more and more prevalent due to facts of individuals are living longer. And in some cases, as we age, there is an increased chance of us getting some of those physical or mental impairments to those major life activities. We're having people survive things that they might not have survived in the past that do lead to increase of disabilities. whether it be premature births, surviving injuries, and so on. And then when we look at prevalence of different diseases right now, such as diabetes and long COVID, those are lead to additional disabilities. Next slide, please. But really, when we talk about disability, it's important to know that disability is much broader than any statistic can really capture. Disability does not discriminate, as it is the only cross-categorical minority group that anybody can join at any point in time. Like I mentioned, I got my membership card at age 12, and then I took advantage of the buy one, get a dozen free deals. The World Health Organization acknowledges that almost everybody will experience some form of disability in their life, whether it be permanent or temporary. This is not to scare people. We are not contagious, but it is likely that everybody does experience the barriers of a disability at some point in their life. Disability can come in many different forms. They can be something congenital that somebody acquires from birth. It can be acquired later in life. Most disabilities are not visible. Many are invisible that we do not see. We will never be able to see all the barriers that an individual is facing. And I think one of the most powerful things a close friend of mine would always say is that all disabilities happen on a spectrum. Just because you met one person with cerebral palsy does not mean you know everything about cerebral palsy. It means you met one person with cerebral palsy. Disability is not a one size fits all, it is not a cookie cutter. Every case is a unique scenario. Next slide. Okay. Oftentimes when we look at disability, it's important to shift away from the traditional medical model of looking at individuals on how do we fix or cure them, and more looking at the social model of thinking of how do we look at the barriers in our community as social constructs. When we look at an individual who may use a wheelchair, they can access a building fine with that accommodation of a wheelchair, provided that there are not those social barriers of inadequate doorways and stairs. If we eliminate those barriers in our community, we eliminate a lot of those barriers that a disability can create. I often say, as an individual with a vision impairment, I don't have an issue sitting down at a restaurant and ordering food. What I have an issue with is trying to read a menu that loves to use the yellow and red color font scheme. That is not great contrast, but that is the barrier that I have to ordering my food, not identifying what it is that I want to eat. Disability truly is a natural part of human diversity, just like ethnicity, gender, height, and so on. It is important to know that the social model does not deny the existence of a disability, but it really promotes the idea of how do we more organically change our environment to eliminate those barriers and eliminate the inaccessibility in our community for those living with a disability. Next slide. Another aspect I'd like to point out when it comes to disability is the concept of person-first language. Person-first language is a way of identifying people a little differently. Instead of referring to somebody as a disabled person, a blind guy, a diabetic woman, an autistic child, it is shifting that language to give the fact that they are a person top billing, referring to them as a person with a disability, a guy who is blind, a woman with diabetes, a child with autism. This frame of speaking can lend a little more identity to that individual instead of prioritizing that diagnosis. Now, I will point out that in the disability community, again, we're talking 61 million individuals. We don't always agree on everything. Just like we can't get the 100 so odd members of our Congress to agree on something, good luck getting 61 million people to agree. There are some populations in the disability community that do prefer identity first language. Those primarily being the deaf and autistic communities. They do prefer identity first language as it is, in their view, part of their identity as an individual. The thing with person first language is I truly feel you're never going to offend somebody with person first language. It is a safe default to use, provided that you're not mislabeling their disability. If you start referring to me as the guy with the facial disfigurement, I might take a little bit of offense. But truly the best method is using the ask method when trying to identify somebody. Ask them how they prefer to be identified. Because in all honesty, if you ask me, I don't want to be referred to as the blind guy. I don't want to be referred to as the guy who is blind. Personally, I hate the term visually impaired because visually, I feel I'm gorgeous. I just want to be identified as John. A person with a vision impairment, whatever, but I think what's most important is that I'm a human first and foremost. I'm more than just my vision. Next slide. So when we talk about why it's important to include disability in a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, why it is important to address inequities, just like many forms of diversity, disability has its own ism. Ableism, which is the conscious and unconscious view of a person with a disability being less than, is very prevalent in our society still today through numerous types of microaggressions. But I think what's most prominent is the fact that our world just was not built for individuals with disabilities. The Americans with Disabilities Act, though great, really impacted buildings built after 1993 and buildings that have seen major renovations after. And there's a ton of barriers still to our physical structure and spaces. Individuals with disabilities have faced massive historical persecution, and if I start talking about that, I'll be here for the next 2 hours. And even when we talk about media representation, individuals with disabilities have not always been portrayed in great light in the media, often used as negative stereotypes, villains in a lot of cases, charity cases, and the oh so fabulous inspiration porn. Next. To look at equity stats, but right now we're looking at about 37% of individuals with a disability are gainfully employed. That is a current high that we are looking at. When I first started doing these presentations, we were much closer to 19%. I think the access of work from home and various accommodations have really helped instill that sense of belonging in the workplace, and we need to continue doing that. But still, that percentage is low. When we look at the percentage of individuals experiencing homelessness, over 40% of individuals are reported to have a disability. And again, that's what's reported. We look at 25.9% of people with disabilities are living in poverty, while just 11.4% of people without disabilities are living in poverty. The statistics go on and on when we look at those with obesity rates, smoking rates, high school graduation rates, and so much more. Individuals with disabilities are inequitably represented in some of the worst categories that we want to improve. Next slide. So when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we really cannot have inclusion unless we have accessibility, as accessibility is that first step to inclusion. It is ensuring that all have access to our physical and our digital spaces. Accessibility really should be at the forefront of our design and our planning, as it is much easier to design with accessibility in mind and then try to go back and fix. Universal design is the term that we use when we're talking about creating that most inclusive space, and how we would go about that is creating a space that is as accessible for the most amount of people, eliminating as many barriers as possible. Equity and inclusion simply cannot exist without accessibility. Next slide. I do want to give a little plug to the organization that myself and Trina, who will be presenting later, are a part of, and that is Disability Advocates of Kent County. We are a nonprofit organization that covers Kent, Ionia, Macomb, Macasta, and Osceola counties. We are a part of a network known as Centers for Independent Living. Centers for Independent Living started up in 1972 by a man named Ed Roberts over in Berkeley, California. As of today, there are over 403 Centers for Independent Living covering every county in the U.S. Here in the state of Michigan, we have Disability Network Michigan as our network. Every county is covered by one of our disability networks or associate names like Disability Advocates of Kent County. Next slide. Another thing I did want to talk about with you all today is the concept of athletics and sports when it comes to individuals with disabilities. This is something very near and dear to my heart as my involvement with the Michigan Blind Athletic Association and the experience I went through acquiring a disability. When I first lost my sight, I was told I could not participate in my school's phys ed because it was not safe. I was a pitcher playing baseball, loved wrestling, loved being athletic, but my school said no to opportunities for me. This I felt was very wrong. And that's when I started discovering adaptive sports. And I think a key to understanding adaptive sports is looking at the adaptive sports model. The adaptive sports model is a tool that we use to make sports more accessible. What this simply does is you're going to change either the goal or the target, change the barrier, or change the rules of the game. For a sport like wrestling that I participated in, we simply instilled a rule known as constant contact where both wrestlers start touching. So if there's a vision impairment, there is no barrier there. When you look at something like wheelchair basketball, there are different rules that are in place to make that sport accessible. Sit volleyball is the same way, different rules to make the sport accessible. An example of the target or goal being changed would be something like beat baseball or five-a-side soccer, blind hockey using audible targets, audible balls or pucks. And when changing the barriers, a sport like five-a-side soccer, soccer for the blind, does involve barricades around the edge of the playing pitch. So those barriers can be felt. Adaptive phys ed is a way of modifying physical education so everybody can participate. Physical education is very important for all individuals, especially those individuals with a disability, as well as having access to adaptive recreational programs. And there are a ton of great programs here in the state of Michigan for all to take advantage of. Next. I do always like pointing out when we talk about disability in sports, two massive international organizations. One is the Paralympics. Many are not familiar with the Paralympics, but they are Olympic-style games that follow immediately after the Olympics. These games are for athletes with physical disabilities. And they are adaptive and sometimes unique sports. I think in the Paralympics, every sport is a parallel to the current Olympic sports, with the exception of three, those being the sport of bocce, goalball, and wheelchair rugby, as those sports are not otherwise represented with parallel. These sports are all participated by individuals with disabilities and played at an international high level of competition. It is, in my opinion, a personal shame that these games do not get as much television and media attention as the Olympics themselves. Another organization that many will be familiar with, and I can say I am presenting to you right now from the world's largest Special Olympics facility in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in the Special Olympics Sports and Inclusion Center. That is the worldwide organization of Special Olympics. Special Olympics, international organization that focuses on creating opportunities for athletes with intellectual disabilities. It has a strong focus on health and fitness, and is an amazing organization that creates numerous opportunities for individuals to get out, exercise, enjoy that thrill of competition, and more. Next slide. So why is it important to consider sports and physical education when you're thinking about individuals with disabilities? It's simple. People with disabilities who indicate that they participate in physical exercise and activity are more often employed. We look at about 41.6% of adults with disabilities are obese, compared to the 29.6% of adults without a disability. We need to create those opportunities. As we often say in the Michigan Blind Athletic Association, we need to take people from the sidelines to the goal lines. Exercise also has a massive impact on individuals' mental health. It can studies have shown that it can reduce anxiety, depression, as well as negative moods, all while improving cognitive function and self-esteem. So when we look at individuals with disabilities, it is important to see that they are much more than just a diagnosis. They can be many different things. They can be our family members, they can be our colleagues, they can even be athletes. Next slide. Actually, I think that's the last one. I appreciate you guys spending some time with me, and I'll pass it over to the next one.
This is Kimberly speaking. Thank you, John, for providing a clear, general overview of our topic today and sharing your knowledge about adaptive sports. Audience, if you have questions, you may add them to our Q&A chat, and we will address them after our last speaker. Next, we will have Trina Edmondson, who is a workforce development manager at Disability Advocates of Kent County. Trina has a degree in paralegal studies from Davenport University. She is employed with Disability Advocates and has been there since 2027, where she has had on many roles. First, as a disability program navigator, helping individuals with disability navigate various systems. And another very important role is ADA employment advocacy, helping both employers and employees with workplace accommodations. Currently, Trina is the primary staff person for the Veteran Services, and she oversees all of the employment programs at Disability Advocates. Trina serves at the pleasure of Governor Whitmer on the Michigan Council for Rehabilitative Services. She is the co-chair for the West Michigan Veteran Coalition's Quality of Life Committee. On a personal note, Trina has been married for 31 years to her husband, Joe. They have a son, Justin, who recently married Savannah in February. She also has 3 rescue cats. Please welcome Trina Edmondson.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I feel honored to be here. And I'm going to talk today about disability discrimination in the workplace. So the next slide. As an overview, we're going to talk about what is an accommodation, what is reasonable, what isn't reasonable, what is an undue hardship. We're also going to cover the process for requesting an accommodation. Keeping it simple but effective. The next slide. So, what is an accommodation? I prefer to call them work tools because they are what we need in order to do our jobs. Computer software, some of the examples I have here, computer software is one example of a accommodation. There are things like screen readers, and those help people who are totally blind to access the internet or documents or Facebook, you know, all of those things that we all love to do. And then there are magnifiers for the screens in the computer, and those are good for people like me I'm legally blind myself. So I use the screen magnifiers. There's also speech recognition software that is for people who have difficulty typing. So it will hear your voice and type for you. The cool thing about these softwares is that they're already built into your computer. At least the magnifiers and speech recognition, sorry. They're already built in. They are easy to access. And the screen reader is a little different. That one is something that they do have a nice, good, free downloadable called NVDA screen reader. But if you're going to be using it for work or professionalism, then you're going to need probably the JAWS software, which can be kind of pricey, but it really does allow people to be able to do that job that they need to. So some other things, WordQ and WinReader are a couple of other ones that really help people who have reading difficulty or dyslexia or learning disabilities. So what that does is you're able to highlight the whatever text that you want to read, and it will read it to you as you follow along. The other piece of it is that it has word prediction. So if you're typing something and you're not quite sure what word to use, you just right click and it gives you a list of options to put in there. Really works very well. It's also important to keep in mind learning styles. So when you're getting trained at work, whether you're the trainer or the learner, it's good to communicate both ways on how that person learns best, whether that's visual or hands-on. Sometimes a person might need a little extra training time. And for employers, there are free resources out there. Job coaches are free to them. There's lots of resources that can provide that. So we just ask that you reach out to the experts, the people who know how to attach you to those resources, and we will do so. It's also important to keep in mind, the equipment and devices also. There is so many things out there that it's impossible for anybody to know about all of it, but we do have some really good resources available. We expect that people would reach out to them, understand that this should be, as John had just said, that this should always be dealt with on a case-by-case basis, because exactly, two people with the same disability have different needs still. And finally, what is reasonable? Well, there's 2 points to be said here. First, usually reasonable relates to the expense or the cost of an accommodation. And while most accommodations really are free, sometimes there is a cost. Maybe it's a small employer who does not have the finances to buy that software of JAWS, which can be anywhere from $2,000 to $4,000. And that's okay, then that would be an undue hardship. But at the same time, the employer has to prove that that's an undue hardship, which means they would need to open their books and show that they don't have the ability to pay for that. And the second piece of that undue hardship is safety risk. Now, it needs to be an obvious risk too. So just using that what if scenario is not going to work. So it's something that just because it could happen doesn't mean that it will. Next slide. Sorry, I dropped something. Medical information is. I'm so sorry. The process, is that where we're at? I'm not seeing the whole screen, I'm sorry. Yes, there we go. All right. The process, step one is to realize that you have a need for an accommodation, and this could be expressed either by the employee or the employer. So if the employer recognizes that somebody's production is going down, it's absolutely okay for them to come up and ask, we see that that is happening. Is there anything that we can do to help? Are there things that available we could do whatever we want, whatever we need to do to help you. So the employee could also bring it up just to say that, hey, you know, I'm having trouble with this job task. Is there something can we talk about what we can do to help me do that task? So at that point is when you should be referred to the human resource department or the equivalent to that, because that could be, if it's a very small organization, that could be the owner of the organization or company. But I say HR because HR is the person that is obligated to keep your information confidential. You must disclose your disability in order to get an accommodation too. And when you talk about disclosure, disclosing to HR, as I said, is confidential. If you disclose to your coworkers, you lost your confidentiality because they have no obligation to keep it confidential. So if you do disclose to your coworkers, just make sure that it is somebody that you trust to keep it well, not necessarily secret, but you know, to not be blabbing it all over the place. So the employer also has the right to ask for documentation about your disability, but they can only ask for information that is directly related to your work, the job tasks that are impacted. So sometimes there's a form to fill out for an accommodation. Sometimes there's not. Sometimes it's in your handbook and sometimes it's not. Either way, just know you need to start with HR. Next slide. Step 2 is all about the interactive process, which has really already started because you started the conversation by requesting the accommodation. But really the interactive process is just a conversation between HR and the employee. But exploring all the many, many things that are available can be very overwhelming. So again, we really suggest reaching out to those experts to help. Disability advocates and other centers for independent living all around the country are available to help with that process. There are also other resources available, such as the Job Accommodation Network, which was very targeted to employers, and the Great Lakes ADA Center. And it's always practical to review accommodations on a regular basis, as needed or as needed. And by that, I mean as needed. If the accommodation isn't working anymore, it needs to be reevaluated. But other than that, a regular basis could be annual evaluation or maybe a biannual evaluation. Just a chance to touch base and make sure things are all still working well. The next slide. I do want to talk a little bit more about medical information. That's not the right slide. Did we already? Medical info. Thank you very much. Medical information. While employers can request documentation, it must be directly related to the job tasks that are impacted, not a complete medical history. Okay, employers can also request a fitness for duty exam if you've been off on a leave of absence due to medical reasons. And it's great to know that accommodation requests are considered medical information, and they must be filed separately than from your personnel file. All medical documentation HR must keep in a separate file. And this is true under either the ADA or HIPAA laws. So when an accommodation has been agreed upon, the HR department will then let your supervisor know what that is, and that's all they really need to know. If they need to know anything more, then HR will cover that with them. So what happens if an accommodation is denied? Next slide. We have to ask, is it, we went backwards, it seems like. Is it discrimination? No, there it is. Is it discrimination? Again, contact the experts. We're out there for you. We do not charge for our consultation in this area. We will explore all the options, we'll make recommendations, and we'll even communicate with your employer to help that process along. Sometimes it's just not possible to save the job, though. At that point, we can help with the complaint process through the Michigan Department of Civil Rights or even the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. We usually send to both organizations because they do work so well together. The next slide. These are those resources that I talked about. So the Job Accommodation Network, the ADA, the Great Lakes ADA Center. Please reach out to them if you need any help in this process or if you feel like discrimination has occurred. And then the last slide is just disability advocates' contact information. Our information and referral department is the first point of contact for any disability questions that you may have. So please reach out to us. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
This is Kimberly speaking. Thank you, Trina, for sharing important information about accommodation requests and the interactive process. Audience, if you have questions, you may add them to the Q&A chat and we will address them after our last presenter. Next, we have Tyra. Tyra began her public service career in 2002 with the Michigan Department of Civil Rights and have worked in different capacities, including civil rights investigator, staff attorney, ADA compliance unit manager, and currently acts as MDCR's Disability Rights and Compliance Director. She oversees the ADA compliance, the Division on Deaf, Deafblind, and Hard of Hearing, FOIA, contract compliance, and disadvantaged business certification units. Tyra is a licensed attorney with a special interest in disability law, accessibility, and fair housing. Over the years, she was given the opportunity to participate in programs offered by the National Fair Housing Training Academy in Washington, D.C., including Fair Housing Investigations, Conciliation for Investigators, and litigating fair housing cases. In 2021, Tyra became a certified ADA coordinator and was appointed by Governor Whitmer as the state of Michigan's interim ADA coordinator. Please welcome Tyra Khan.
This is Tyra speaking. Thank you, Kimberly, and thanks for everyone for joining us today on this very important topic. Just a bit of self-description. I am an Asian woman in her early 50s. I have dark brown hair with specks of gray, and I'm wearing a multicolored print shirt. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about digital accessibility, but I'll just give a very brief overview of some of the areas of the law that haven't been touched upon yet by my co-presenters. Next slide, please. So just so everyone's aware, the information that we provide in this presentation is not intended to constitute legal advice. All information, content, and materials used in this training are for general informational purposes only and are not a determination of an individual particular legal rights. Sharing or dissemination of the contents of this presentation is explicitly prohibited unless permission is granted by our division. You do have permission to share as we provide the slides for accessibility purposes. Next slide, please. So just a little bit, my colleagues did, or co-presenters did talk a little bit about definitions of disability under the law, but there are two main laws that we work with in our department when it comes to disability status. First and foremost is the federal law called the Americans with Disabilities Act, that is also abbreviated to ADA. It's the first comprehensive federal civil rights law that prohibits discrimination based on disability status in all areas of civic life, and it includes employment, as the co-presenters talked about earlier, public service, the government services that we utilize in our life, public accommodations, and those are businesses that are open to the public but privately owned, and then telecommunications. Then we have a similar state law called the Persons with Disabilities Civil Rights Act, again, a Michigan law. It provides very similar protections to the ADA. And as I said, digital access is a topic that's somewhat of a quagmire for people because even though there are issues with structural accessibility that we see on a day-to-day basis, we are seeing that there is a lot more education to be done in the digital access world. So when we talk about digital access or accessibility, it just means the ability of users, all users, including those with disabilities, to easily navigate and understand digital content, the things that we all use every day, websites, mobile applications, things that we use on our phone, and any electronic-based information. The ADA does not contain a digital or content standard baked into the law, so that is something that we look to other sources for. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about what the ADA and state and local government services. A lot of you already know this. It's a good reminder. The ADA covers state and local government entities under Title II. The law is broken down into different provisions called titles. And Title II talks about what the obligations of our government services are. So first and foremost, we have to provide those reasonable accommodations, or sometimes they're called modifications. And those are changes in the way things are normally done in order to allow people with disabilities to have equitable service. The ADA also has an overarching requirement that you not discriminate in all programs, services, and activities against people with disabilities. And those programs, services, and activities very much include our websites, electronic documents, program brochures, application materials, meeting notices, and the list goes on and on. Next slide, please. So the ADA also addresses private businesses that are open to the public. So not only the government services that we utilize, but when we go to the grocery store or the movie theater, the gas station, doctor's office, Title III of the ADA covers those businesses that are open to the public. And it's the same type of coverage. Those businesses have to provide reasonable accommodations to people in all of their services that are public facing to allow people with disabilities to have equitable and meaningful access. Title III doesn't directly address things when it comes to public accommodations, websites, mobile applications, and those emerging web technologies. But the Department of Justice, which is the primary federal organization or department that is responsible for enforcing the ADA, has taken the position that Title III does apply to all of those public-facing websites that are used by companies. Like if you're ordering something online, a pizza, or going onto a website to see if you're making a reservation somewhere, all of those things the DOJ says are covered under Title III of the ADA. Next slide, please. So in addition to those protections and obligations for Title II and Title III entities, the ADA fleshes out a little bit more about what state and local governments have to do to make sure that what they're doing is accessible to people with disabilities. And it's because we are stewards of public funds. And so we have a high duty and threshold to make sure that what we're doing is accessible to all. So one of the things that's baked into the ADA, it says that public entities with 50 or more employees have to do certain things. And you can see that on the slide here. The first one is to designate at least one employee who's responsible for coordinating compliance and responsibilities under the ADA. For the state of Michigan, that's me. Those public entities also have to provide the name, address, office, telephone number, email, contact information of those employees who are designated in that role. So the public knows how to get a hold of someone who's in charge of these things if they run into problems with a public-facing program, service, or activity. And then finally, the public entity has to adopt and publish a grievance procedure. The grievance procedure is different from a lawsuit or even an administrative complaint filed with our department under the enforcement unit. The grievance procedure is meant to be a prompt and remedial way to get your digital or otherwise inaccessible program issue or concern addressed by the state or local government entity. It's not meant to take a long time to rectify those things. There is a prompt and remedial obligation of the state or local entity to answer those concerns and communicate with the public. And we have a link in this slide to the ADA Title II regulations that flesh out all of those things that I just talked about. Next slide, please. So in Michigan, we have some extra protections aside from the federal law that we just talked about. In 2004, Governor Granholm, Governor Granholm, she signed an executive order that said, in addition to the requirements under the ADA, Michigan goes a step further. It says not only do we have to comply with the ADA and other state federal disability laws, but Michigan has to also create a state ADA coordinator responsible for ensuring compliance for executive branch departments. And again, that's my role. So the executive order only applies to executive branch departments, but our department, Michigan Department of Civil Rights, by agreement, has authority to administer the grievance process for the legislative branch and judicial as well. So we put that link on the public facing websites as a resource so people know that this is where you go if you have a concern with any state department, whether it's executive, judicial, or legislature. So the executive order appoints the state ADA coordinator. It also says that executive branch departments have to appoint one person within each department. So like DNR, lottery, treasury, they also have an individual in their own department whose responsibility is to ensure compliance for that department with the ADA. And they work with us very frequently. We offer them trainings. We administer that grievance procedure. We're there as a technical resource for those departments. The executive order lays out the duties of the state and departmental ADA coordinators. Basically says that we have to ensure that we're complying with the law. We have to provide training to the public or any interested party on disability law and compliance when requested and reasonable to do so. And then the departments have to work with my unit, me and my team that does ADA compliance. So they have an obligation to cooperate with us when we say there's a grievance that's filed and we're going to send that to you. They have to address it in a timely manner and any other issues or concerns that come up outside of that grievance procedure. Next slide, please. So moving on, so we talked a little bit about the law that applies to disability, some of the regulations that apply, the executive order in Michigan, businesses and government services that are covered. Now we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about accessible content. And Trina talked about screen readers, and that's a tool for people who have vision-related disabilities to utilize written text, written information, and it reads it out loud. But it doesn't really do any good to use a screen reader if the content that we are creating is not accessible or usable by a screen reader. So some of the things that we're going to talk about right now are really, all of them are really important when you are creating content, digital content, so you can ensure that what you're creating is accessible and usable to all people, including those with screen readers. So digital access, as I said before, it involves websites, social media networks, mobile applications, electronic documents that are used and understood by a wide range of users, including folks with visual, auditory, motor, or cognitive disabilities. The first thing that we talk about is Microsoft's Accessibility Checker. It's a built-in tool that ensures that digital products are inclusive and accessible to everyone. That's a good way to check your document. It's a way that we should all be checking our document, Microsoft Word document, before we make it public. So that's like the tool that's used. You want to run the accessibility checker for Outlook email messages, Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, PowerPoint slide decks. That's a big one, right? We spend a lot of time in our division reviewing PowerPoint presentations that are going to be used publicly because we want to make sure that that information, it means something to all people. And then, or your OneNote notebook. And again, we do this to ensure content is accessible and readable. So that's the tool one of the tools that we use, but it's always better to create your document from the ground up using accessible elements. It's really hard it's like putting the toothpaste back in the tube, right? It's easier to create and build your document in an accessible manner from the get-go than trying to fix errors after the fact. So one of the main things that we see is what we call alternative text. Alternative text is a way to convey the why, or why are we putting this image in here of an image. It relates to what meaning does that image bring to your content. The image needs to have alternative text behind it, because a screen reader will read aloud the text behind an image. And if there's no alt text there, the person who uses a screen reader is losing the meaning or content of that image. So it's important that any images that are used are accessible to people by creating accessible content. And alternative text. That doesn't mean it has to be wordy, or you don't have to write a book on an image. It should be described in a meaningful way that relates to the written word. Next slide, please. So a little bit more on accessible content, part 2. So we talked about images that are meaningful, but there's also things called decorative visual content. That differs from meaningful visual images or content, because decorative stuff doesn't add any information, and it's purely decorative, as the name describes. Decorative elements don't need to have alternative text behind them, but what they should be marked is as decorative. So when you're doing your accessibility check, make sure things like borders on this slide, the example on this slide is the border on this slide. The dark blue rectangles with our MDCR logo and the red line on this slide are decorative. They don't add any meaning to the slide, so they should be marked as decorative, so the screen reader isn't trying to read what's not meaningful. Another area is formatting your text or font. Format text or font. Font is a very important thing, accessible font for documents, because typography choices will impact accessibility. An accessible font means using a typeface that's designed for easy reading by a diverse audience. Some fonts we know are better than others. We should be not using fonts that have serif, so the little footing on them. We always say that we should be using sans serif footing, like Calibri or Veranda. Those are acceptable types, and there's certainly others. You should also be using larger font sizes to reduce the need to resize or extend the page. For PowerPoint presentations, we say make them as big as possible without it looking, or without it being too big. So a lot of the time, the font size that we use in PowerPoints is 26 to 40. So hyperlinks, these are important because the screen reader user, they have the software that will read, they can have software that will read just the links on the web page, so they can organize the material just like a chapter in a book. So we want to ensure that the links that we are including in digital content are meaningful when they're read aloud by a screen reader, and not just a HTTP URL www. That doesn't mean anything to a screen reader. You want to ensure that those hyperlinks describe where you are directing the person to go. Always use concise and meaningful hyperlinks, and again, avoid those URLs, because it just doesn't, it's just a bunch of gobbledygook to a screen reader. You want to make sure that what you're using is describing it in proper context. Color coding. Color coding is using color to convey information or meaning, and we should avoid using color coding in and of itself without any other medium of information, because people who are blind or have low vision, colorblind, they miss out on the meaning of what you're trying to convey because the color is meaningless in some cases. Color coding should be avoided, or at least using some alternative cues like bolding, underlining, words, text, things like that. Next slide, please. Color contrast. This is another area of issue that we see when we're reviewing PowerPoint decks for our guests. Low contrast colors are difficult for people with vision-related disabilities to see, so you should ensure that there is, proper contrast. It's important that we use that sufficient contrast between the text and the background colors, because sometimes the written text can get swallowed up or drowned out by red colors or colors that don't have that sufficient color contrast. We use a tool called WebAIM, and it's free and everyone can go on that website and use it. You can check the color of your documents, the text against the foreground and background to make sure that what you're sending out to the public can be usable by all people. And so again, we also say don't highlight text or be mindful of highlighting text because it often changes the contrast between the text and the background, again, making it more difficult for people to see. And then the final area of a digital content that I'm going to talk about today is that video accessibility. So just like today, we have a captioner. Captions are a critical element in video accessibility. It's important that they're accurate and placed in an area of the video screen that makes them legible. If you are placing your caption across the middle of the screen, the user is not going to be able to meaningfully participate in the presentation because the content is blocked. Consider using audio description, which is a separate audio track that plays with a video and it narrates images and actions on the screen. Only use media players that have keyboard operable controls to accommodate people who can't use a mouse. And then video content should be understandable by a wide range of users, including those with visual, auditory, motor, and cognitive disabilities. We talk a lot about recently about AI, and one aspect of AI is closed captioning. And we know many of us have used that before. Auto caps or auto closed captioning is often incorrect. Now we know that live captioners are the best way to go, but obviously human error happens, but there's a lot less error on the end of a live captioner as opposed to that AI automated captioning. Next slide, please. So we're coming to the close of my time with you. This is just a page about requirements and resources that you can visit. Obviously, the ada.gov is the Department of Justice website. They have lots of good information, technical guidance, and resources on everything that we talked about today, in addition to other things. The Americans with Disabilities Act linked to their regulations is there because the law is one thing, and it tells us what we can and can't do, but it doesn't tell us how to implement things or always flesh out. So there are implementing regulations, which are different than the law. They are created by the entity here, the DOJ, that has enforcement power over the ADA. And it just gives a better explanation about what do these things mean that are written in the law and how do we make that happen? The next one is a link to our Michigan law, the Michigan Persons with Disabilities Civil Rights Act. Again, that state law that mirrors the ADA in most respects. There are some differences here and there. There's a link to professionally recognizes best practices from Word, Adobe, and PowerPoint. And then finally, the WebAIM digital content checker that I mentioned earlier is a really good resource if you are a person that creates content. Next slide, please. And that brings us to the end. If you have any questions, I will let the moderator direct you how to answer them. Thank you very much. Oh, yep, sorry, you can contact us. Here's our contact information, my phone number and email, and then Michigan Department of Civil Rights main line in Detroit, as well as our toll-free number and our TTY number as well. Please think of us if you have any requests for training or additional information. We'd be happy to provide that.
Thank you. This is Kim speaking. Thank you, Tyra, for a wonderful presentation that gave us some important information that will ensure Michiganders' civil rights are protected and regarding concerns of accessibility. I will ask that all our panelists please restore your video as we begin our Q&A. Audience, feel free to put any questions you have for either presenter in the Q&A chat. To honor and request time, we will address as many questions as possible. Q&A monitor, would you please read the first question?
Hi, this is Kevin speaking. I am with the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. Our first question is a situational question. Person had a scenario this weekend where they stayed in a quote unquote handicap accessible hotel room, and the toilet was under ADA compliant height of at least 18 inches. and they want to know how would they register a complaint and what are some things they could possibly do to advocate for themselves in the moment.
This is Tyra speaking. If you want, I can start that, and if anybody wants to jump in there. So obviously, our department does investigate complaints. So what you're talking about, a hotel, is covered under Title III of the ADA. It's a private business that's open to the public. We don't have jurisdiction over the ADA when it comes to public accommodations, but as I said earlier, the Michigan Persons with Disabilities Civil Rights Act is a similar state law that covers those areas. So you can reach out to our department's intake unit, and I believe Kevin put that in answered that in the chat, providing that information. If you're interested in filing a complaint or learning more about our department, you can speak with someone about that.
I could mention a couple of things. This is Trina from Disability Advocates. We do have an accessibility specialist here, and that person does audits for different companies, organizations, to help them understand what it means to be accessible, not just under the ADA, but even a step further. So Jackson Bosford is our accessibility specialist, and he'd be happy to have a discussion as well.
This is Kim speaking. Chat moderator, would you please proceed with another question?
No problem. Next question. This is Kevin speaking. Could you please share practical examples of how employers can be more considerate of individuals with different learning styles?
This is John. One thing that can be easily done is being able to present information in different ways. So as a certified job developer, something that can be done to explain tasks is have visual aids that also explain tasks, because not everybody is an auditory learner and can just remember the task that they hear and envision what they're doing. Some people do need that hands-on demonstration. And again, those visual diagrams for constant reminders and assistance do go a long way for individuals who do follow visual, auditory, or kinesthetic learning styles.
This is Tyra speaking. It's a really good answer. I just want to add, like, on a higher level, assessing the culture of the employment setting and the employer is a really good start, because we know that the tone and change the buy-in has to come from the top. So if you're trying to create a culture of inclusion and equity, you have to get the people at the top to buy in first. And another really important thing to do is do a review of what you're doing, the work that you're doing, identify accessibility concerns and barriers, not only for your staff, but for your customers. Because if you don't know what's wrong, you don't know how to fix it.
Wonderful, thank you. This is Kim speaking. Kevin, can you please provide us with another question?
No problem. This is Kevin speaking. Has there been any pushback from educational institutions and/or sports teams regarding adaptive sports? What happens when adapting to sports changes the nature of the sport entirely?
This is John. So there's always some level of pushback because people don't know. There's always that level of hesitation. When it comes to Michigan high school sports, I think it's the MHSAA. Forgive me, I don't have the organization on hand. There are specific rules in those handbooks for adapting different disabilities for the different sports. Oftentimes, some advocacy may be needed to help explain those rules, as well as coaching techniques for those athletes. I know the Michigan Blind Athletic Association has worked with coaches in the past on coaching techniques for coaching an individual with vision impairment, as well as there are other organizations that can accommodate those different aspects. So when there's pushback, there are organizations that can help advocate for, but there are regulations and rules that ensure the sports can be modified in some aspects, as well as there are alternative sports like inclusive sports that welcome additional accommodations.
This is Kim speaking. Kevin, do you have any additional questions in the chat?
This is Kevin speaking. We have 3 more questions. The next question is, how would I file a Title II grievance?
So this is Tyra speaking. Yep, and I believe Kevin did put the link to the website in the chat. You can either call us if you, first and foremost, we have a website that's accessible to people with disabilities if they want to file the complaint. It's michigan.gov/disability resources, and it will take you through different explanations of the ADA, the complaint procedure, the notice requirements, if you require an accommodation, your rights under the law. If you are not comfortable using a computer, you can always email me directly at cont@michigan.gov, and I can put that, if Kevin could put that in the Q&A, or you could call 517-249-9989, and if Kevin can put that in the chat as well. It is on the last slide of the deck that we provided.
This is Kevin speaking. Tyra, could you give the phone number one more time and I'll type it in?
Sure.
Sorry.
Yep. 517-249-9989. The preferred method is if you're able to use the online system, certainly do that, but you can always call or email me if you cannot.
All right. This is Kevin speaking. We have one more question. The last 2 questions were one of the same. So looks like this question is for Trina. They would like to know how you spell Jackson Boxford. Just make sure they have the correct spelling. And if you could spell it out for us, I'll type it in also.
Absolutely, no problem. Jackson, Jackson. Boxford is B as in boy, O-S, F as in Frank, O-R-D.
Thank you. And actually, I see a few more questions popped in. Let me get to that. So we have, what should someone do before filing a complaint about discrimination?
This is Tyra speaking. I can answer that if you want, and obviously the co-presenters can weigh in. Just gather your information as best as you can. Try to maybe write down or somehow record your recollection of the events. If it's an employment concern, the name of the employer, address, when you started working there, just getting your information ready to speak with an investigator and intake unit. I think that's probably the best thing to do.
I would just add, Trina from Disability Advocates, that as I said in my presentation, we do offer free consultation, and I will listen to your story. We'll talk about different options that you might have so that you can make informed choice.
All right. We have another question. This is Kevin speaking. What happens if a person has to file a complaint with NDCR? How is it handled?
This is Tyra speaking. I guess I'll take that one too. It's been a minute since I've been out of the enforcement game, but I still remember. So the initial process is communicating with someone from our intake unit. And we have several ways you can do that. We have an online inquiry form that you can file, a complaint form. You can call one of the numbers that we provided and speak with someone. You can also send an email. There's different ways, and obviously we accommodate people in order for them to access the intake interview. So if you required some type of accommodation, we could certainly do that. The intake representative will listen to your concerns to see if it's jurisdictional for our department in terms of the laws that we enforce. Do we have authority to investigate it? Is it within the time parameters that we have to investigate complaints? And if all of those jurisdictional requirements are met, they will draft a complaint that captures your concerns and send it to you however you want it sent to you. You have to sign the complaint, and then it gives us authority to investigate. An investigation can include numerous things such as interviewing witnesses, making an on-site visit, obviously talking to the customer who's filing the complaint. We call them the claimant. The complaint is sent to the entity that you're filing against, whether it's an employer or a business. They are called the respondent. They have time to answer the complaint, to put together an answer. It's an adversarial proceeding, so it's a kind of a back and forth. You file the complaint, they have the opportunity to answer. The complaint will be assigned to an investigator. The investigator will inform the customer, the complainant, of the answer that the respondent provided and get your rebuttal information. They may create an investigation plan, as I said, interviewing witnesses, requesting documents from the respondent, whatever they need to do to determine, their course of investigation. At the end of an investigation, a determination will be made of whether there's sufficient evidence to move forward. There oftentimes is not. That doesn't mean that the department doesn't believe what you're saying or that we don't care about your concerns, but there are evidentiary standards that we have to meet. So that's a determination that has to be made with the team that's investigating the complaint and includes a staff attorney. So if there is insufficient evidence and we're unable to resolve the complaint will be closed. The customer will be informed of the closure and they will have appeal rights. Our appeals are heard by a separate reconsideration attorney. If there is sufficient evidence, we try to resolve the case. We try to resolve the complaint. If the complaint is not resolvable and the department feels that they should move forward, they can schedule what's called a conciliation hearing. It's kind of like a last-ditch effort to resolve the complaint before a formal charge of discrimination is issued. If the complaint is resolved in conciliation, great, a settlement agreement will be drafted, everyone will sign it, and the case will be closed. If we still determine there's sufficient evidence of a violation of the laws that we enforce, but the respondent isn't willing to resolve the case, it would go back to legal to decide what the next course of action could be. One possible outcome is issuing that formal charge against the respondent, which then moves the case into the administrative law venue. And there are hearings that happen and again, adversarial proceedings. So that's kind of down the road, but that's a nutshell. That's a crash course of what we do. If something were to go to charge and oral arguments were heard, an administrative law judge would make findings and recommendations on the case that would then go to our commission, who could either adopt the findings or order their own hearing. So that's a spectrum of the process. Hope that answers that question. But if you do have more, you want to know more in detail, you can contact us and we can talk to you a little bit more one-on-one with more time.
All right, this is Kevin speaking. I see we have one more question in the queue. That is, I believe they're asking, what are the time constraints for filing complaints? That's the way I understand the question.
The jurisdictional time. So if you're filing under the state law, you have 180 days to file a complaint.
And I do not, this is Kevin speaking again, I do not see any other questions at this time.
Okay. This is Kim speaking. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, panelists. We appreciate you being with us today, and we want to, again, thank you as well as the audience for being with us. As we come to a close, I want to share the My Response to Hate pledge. Would one of our screen shares please share the pledge at this time? You may ask, why take the pledge? Michigan residents and visitors have a right to work, play, and live in a safe, welcoming, and affirming environment that values the diverse attributes of all individuals, regardless of race, religion, sex, age, disability, national origin, and all protected bases. Everyone has a responsibility to prevent hate in our state. If we stand together, we can change our communities into places that reflect love and not hate. Join us in making an affirmative stand that will make our state a positive place for everyone, where all are respected. The pledge reads, I will treat others with respect and dignity. I will speak out against racism and other forms of hate. I believe one person can make a difference. My response to hate is love. Reciting this pledge is a way to demonstrate your commitment to a hate-free Michigan. I encourage each of you to publicly share the pledge on all your social media platforms using the hashtag #MyResponseToHate and my response is love. The pledge has been placed in the chat for your convenience. Lastly, I would like to extend a major thanks to all of our panelists. Your expertise and insights have been invaluable. I would also like to thank all of the registrants for joining us today. We welcome you to join us at our future forums. We will have the forum list, please placed in the chat for everyone to see if you will bring that up. The next one is scheduled for Thursday, May 23rd from 1 to 3 p.m. This forum is titled The Great Replacement Myth. To find the registration information for this event and to learn more about the My Response to Hate campaign, please visit the Michigan Department of Civil Rights webpage, which is www.michigan.gov/MDCR. We hope to see you next month. Remember, eliminating hate and bias in our state is all of our responsibility. Thank you for joining us today.